Hello guys and welcome to RAT episode 3. I have a layout now. I'm pretty excited about that. Not going to get into it just yet, but this is probably going to take a while. That being said, now we're going to get into it. The first thing I want to be talking about is the culture within Hearthstone. Now, this is an interview that I did a year ago, and it was based on, it wasn't an interview, my bad, it was more of like a Twitter rant, as you can see here. Whoops. Now, I want to open with this, I think this is very important, and it explains why we have some of the problems we have in Hearthstone right now. As you can see here, I say the blame RNG in Hearthstone is a joke culture, isn't helping you pros in terms of longevity. You act like winning is happenstance. This was when I was less established in the scene, so that's for the language. And then I said here, it's kind of upsetting you have to actually highlight these, but you do. As a player, I take the game on a professional level seriously. I do not demean the game with talk about RNG or skilllessness. The blame RNG in Hearthstone is a joke culture, isn't helping you pros in terms of longevity. You act like winning is happenstance. People love watching people do things they are good at. When you continuously throw Hearthstone under the bus, what do you think happens? The quality of viewer decreases. The numbers of viewer decreases. What you do now becomes a joke. Jokes get old. To be clear, it isn't helping any player, pro, semi-pro, whatever you want to list yourself as. It's an unattractive part of the Hearthstone culture. And then I had a thought about how you can't be upset at Blizzard for catering to this type of thing. Now, the reason why I bring this interview up now isn't just because I feel like it's applicable, but because in this episode of Value Town here, Frodan actually says basically verbatim everything I've said in this article already a year ago, way out before it was a problem. So now, one thing that I've been thinking a lot about recently, and I think that doesn't get enough attention, is that Hearthstone is consumed at an insane rate. We're talking thousands of games, data from thousands of games. People can play 100 games a day, and people do play 100 games a day, and thousands of games are played with decks to reach the best deck. Unlike any other TCG, its availability is constant. You can pick up and play Hearthstone anytime you want. You can't pick up a Magic and play Magic anytime you want. You have to have somebody to play against. Yeah, you can argue, well, you can play the online client. Well, even the online client, you don't have a lot of the good players playing the online client, and the players who are good playing the online client are playing in dailies, which are 4-round tournaments during the day. You can't sit there and play 100 games of Magic in a day. That's ridiculous. So because Hearthstone is so accessible, and people are consuming so much Hearthstone, I don't know how much the average viewer consumes on a weekly basis, but let's say it's only 10 hours or something. It all adds up very quickly. The meta gets solved quicker, and this type of joking becomes prominent very fast, and it affects them on a daily basis. If I tune into a stream and I hear, let's say, RanT complaining, and every, let's say, 20 minutes I hear something about Tuskar Totemic, then I switch to someone else and they do it, then I switch to someone else and they do it, then I switch to someone else and they do it. Obviously, by the end of it, I'm going to think Tuskar Totemic is a problem. This isn't to say whether or not it is or not a problem. Just that it becomes very obvious when you think about how much Hearthstone is consumed and how fast it's consumed, how these types of ideas can get traction, and the circle jerk occurs, so to speak, very easily. Now, an example of this, which Frodan actually talks about in the video, is that he brings up Patron Warrior. When Patron Warrior was very popular, obviously I'm a fan of Patron Warrior, but when it was very popular, before they nerfed it for BlizzCon, everyone was calling for a nerf. Then they nerfed Patron, and they said, oh, the math wasn't that good, it didn't actually have a high win rate, We really didn't want to nerf it. And then Reddit was upset because now Secret Paladin was the best deck, and they were like, give us Patron back. So it just goes to show that just because something's being touted doesn't mean that it actually needs to be fixed. That brings us to Yogg-Saron, current situation with ban lists, and Tuskar Totemic. First, I want to start out by saying that Yogg's range could definitely be narrowed. But the average power of Yogg isn't the problem. A card like Alexstrasza's Champion often gets more mana value in Freeze Mage by dealing 15 damage and putting an 8/8 on the board than a Yogg-Saron does. It's important that I also say that I don't think that Yogg needs to be nerfed or changed in any way. There were Magic formats where one card or one deck was a lot better than any of the decks now. And I don't think that many of the games are decided by Yogg as people think, and I think that's also important to note that the people's deck lists are built a certain way. We would never have seen Moonfire played if Yogg-Saron didn't exist. It just never would have been played in the deck. So all of a sudden we were playing a weak card in the deck, and it's like, oh, well, they're always behind. Well, of course they're always behind. They're playing Yogg-Saron in their deck. They're running a bunch of spells that aren't good, so that Yogg is better. In turn, with Arcane Giant. Now, I think it's important to note that within the current meta, you have two decks that are believed to be the best, probably. Druid and Shaman. Both those decks have a bunch of cards that work well together. Arcane Giant, Raven Idol. You know, some of these cards are very well designed, honestly. And in the terms of Shaman, I think it's important to say that in current mid-range Shaman lists, they don't play a 7/7 for 4 mana. And now they're even starting to cut Trog. That means that these cards are in an area where they're not so broken that you have to play them in every Shaman deck. So they're actually relatively close to being balanced. Most people probably didn't think that that's the case. Maybe they complain about it. I know that I watched a video of Crip playing against a Shaman deck. I'll pull it up right here. That's that. And he was ranting about how, in the video, how Shaman's a problem because he cannot build a control deck and win against Shaman. And this is where I'm going to really get into the rant. This is nothing against Crip or what he's doing. This is where the what my idea of perceptions of false reality come into play. Now, let's say Crip's opponent in this clip, I can make it bigger for you guys so you guys can see it in this picture. Let's say Crip's opponent in this video gets this deck offline. This Shaman deck, whether or not this guy's a good player, has possibly been refined by a professional player, or non-professional player, whatever, a player out there, players, all of us really together playing the ladder for thousands of games. It's been perfected over all those games by all those people to get to the point where it's so streamlined that it can perform at this level. So obviously your control deck that you just threw together isn't going to be able to deal with this Shaman deck effectively. It's also note that you're not necessarily playing cards that are very conducive of stopping aggro. I mean, he runs Blade Master. Actually, in this game, he gets to go coin Blade Master, resurrect Blade Master, Onyx Bishop, Blade Master, and he still loses. This is just to highlight the point that when you're complaining as a player like Crip that this Shaman deck you can't beat it with your decks that you're making, you have to realize that unlike Magic the Gathering or any other card game before Hearthstone, this deck has had thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of hours put into it. Why would you expect to beat that deck with your control deck? I think that's an unreasonable expectation. And it's important that we have reasonable expectations when evaluating the actual state of the game. Now, I think it's also important to note that the cards within Shaman, while overpowered, are interesting. Tunnel Trog, for instance, works very well with Overload. Obviously, it's a pretty common concept. And yeah, Tunnel Trog might be a strong turn 1 play, but you know, at least it's not boring. Mana Worm, no one's calling this card boring. A card like Zombie Chow may be a little bit more boring to people. And you can understand what I'm saying. The 4-mana 7/7 has Overload, which works with, you know, other Overload cards or Lava Burst. You know, there's some of these things. The 4-mana 7/7 is more standalone. But a card like Spirit Claws, for instance, that's really good. You know, it does have synergy. So these cards become interesting. So not only is Shaman now a good deck, but in my opinion, I know there's some people out there who play control decks and only like playing control decks, but this kind of interaction is very fun. Like, if you play a mid-range Shaman, then you have Spirit Claws, getting up to 3 attack. I don't know. I personally enjoy it, and I think some of the synergies like that are pretty interesting. And you also see it in Druid, where you play all these spells. You have Raven Idols that decrease your Arcane Giants. You have Fandral that goes with the spell and has it do a nice thing. And maybe that's part of the reason why some of the other decks aren't as good. You could argue that these cards are busted. But if you look at the overall power level of the game, of the cards in the game, it's fucking a million times lower than it was this time last year. The average power level is insanely low compared to that. The decks that we played this time of year, or the decks that we played this time of year, the decks we play now compared to like a combo druid or a handlock or a patron from before, I mean, it's comical. It's the power level is comical. These cards aren't too strong. That's not the problem. Maybe the other cards are too weak. Maybe the other cards need to be better and more interesting. I personally love playing Shaman versus Druid, so I don't mind. I know it's not a popular... Even my cat doesn't like it, man. I'll be right back. How's it going, guys? We're just going to jump right into it this time. What is good?